Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Are you ready for something different? It might sound like it's something that you know, but I'm going to tell you now it's going to be a little different. It involves lease-to-own and investors, and how these two things can work together. My guest is Adam Zock. He's the co-founder of Home Equity Partner. Their vision is a world where investors purchase homes directly for those who can't secure a traditional mortgage, and they link renters seeking control and equity with worldwide real estate investors, that could be you, pursuing passive income. They specialize in rent-to-own, lease purchase options, and contract for deeds. Let's get to Adam Zock. This is episode 175 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Adam Zock. Adam is the co-founder of Home Equity Partner, where they transform renters into homeowners across the Midwest, bridging the gap for people who are 1 to 3 years away from mortgage eligibility. But the cool thing is that they achieve this by connecting them with real estate investors seeking double-digit returns backed by real estate. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I love your background in the Miro and excited to dive in more.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, we were just talking briefly before we got on, but I want to start with just the general affordable home crisis that we're seeing across America with what we thought was going to be lowering prices, and they've continued to go up. Is part of what you guys do at Home Equity Partner assist with affordable housing?
So the idea of specifically addressing like sub $250,000 homes, maybe not directly in that lower price range, the idea is so that they don't get priced out. Because it seems like, they want to buy in 2024. But then in 2025, when they're ready, prices have gone up X amount or interest rates have changed. And so the idea is, can you, in addition to or in response to a kind of a give and take with a rent payment or a monthly payment, can you share some of that upside between the investor and the tenant? Because typically it's 100% equity, 0% equity. So we're trying to do some sort of a split so that they can get into the home at a pre-agreed price.
Yeah. And I think when I talk about affordable housing, I'm talking about something different because I think across the country, everybody thinks affordable housing means just your traditional Section 8 subsidized housing. But I'm talking about affordable for everybody, which is exactly how you responded. Like some people are just getting priced out of the market who were an easy shot to buy a home and now couldn't. So helping them to figure out a best way or an opportunity that's maybe not as daunting. And it also helps people who are having trouble qualifying for mortgages as well, correct?
That's right. Yeah, if everyone had some sort of skin in the game on the equity upside for the, billions of dollars going into rent, that would be pretty cool if they could tap into that just because of inflation, what prices have done as interest rates have peaked and now maybe coming back down, and who knows what they're going to do. Historically, prices will kind of stagnate or go down when interest rates, double, but not in today's inflationary market. So now that the prices are going back down, I imagine a similar trend, depending on what the inventory does, might follow similar suit.
Yeah, well, let's go back to your background. When growing up was the first time you remember thinking about real estate as something that could play a role in your life later?
So it really wasn't on my mind until post-college when I bought my first home and had my buddies renting out the rooms.
Oh, awesome.
I kind of knew that real estate in general, can be this benefit, but I don't pretend to be smart enough, to know that. It was like, can I have fun in college and can I get good grades? And it's like, it wasn't much beyond that where I had, kind of these great ambitions. But it's like once you start the W-2 world, people like me, your foot starts tapping underneath the table.
Yeah, that's pretty much every guest I've had on the podcast and myself, because we all have the same entrepreneurial mindset where like we can do the 9 to 5, but as like, you're right, you're like, well, I mean, this office kind of sucks.
That's right. Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, what am I going to put my energy into? Football starting back up? Should it be fantasy football, or could it be building a real estate business that's going to do different things? So to each their own, and some people might enjoy different pieces, but I love the fact that you can get into something that over a long-term gain has once I read the stat that the most millionaires in the world have been created through some version of whether it's land, real estate, or some version of that. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. You can just make one decision, and in 30 years it'll make you a millionaire.
Yeah, if you can wait. And I think that's part of the trouble with like today's investor, need everything now type of mentality. But when you bought that first home, how did you even know as a concept, like, hey, let me just rent some rooms to my friends? I mean, obviously you would have open rooms. You're not going to buy a 3 or 4 bedroom for yourself, and you're in college. So it seems cool, but it's still a very smart business decision before really house hacking was previously on your radar, or room hacking.
Yeah, that's right. So when I grew up in a town of population of 13,000 in North Dakota, I moved to the big city, which had like 50,000 people, which is still like incredibly small by most people's standards. So like when I bought my first house for 140,000, I overpaid for it in 2012. But like, now it sold last year for, call it 200 and some, but it was like, at the time, it always seems like it's high priced. And of course, 2012, wasn't necessarily a bad time, but the idea was like, okay, if I feel like I'm moving somewhere, do I really want to be renting? And for some people, it's like, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to be doing this. Once you kind of have a career and you feel like you're going to be there for more than a year, my suggestion would be to do that. And going from 0 to 1, I feel like is the hardest part for most people. If they can, and for me, every property that I lived in, I turned into a rental, because that was the easiest one to just be like, oh, I know this property like the back of my hand. It's the easiest one, to turn into a rental. I just happened to do them with a standard lease or a lease with an option to buy, which I did on the last couple homes, to be able to kind of segue into that niche. But that was kind of like the versus just like, oh, I'm going to buy this property, hope that the repairs and maintenance are what they are, hope that I can get the capital, hope I can do different things. And so for me, doing that and kind of realizing like, hey, I could at least, live close to rent free. But then once you start doing some fun calculations, being a civil engineer, you're like, man, after 30 years, if this appreciated by 4% and I did nothing with it and just paid the mortgage, like, oh, I turns out I'm a millionaire in 30 years, which is like, that's just wild to think of.
Yeah. And I mean, even to think that you were, the first few that you bought, you kept them all. That's still a smart decision. Even when I was younger, I was brought up by a dad who was an investor, but I kind of got like the juice out of selling. I was kind of, like he had a ton of rental properties, but I like to sell. I like to just see the spread, which is idiotic, really at the time, but I would pour it in to do other projects. How did you know, like, hey, this is just a long-term play before you were really thinking, hey, I guess I'm a real estate investor? Because it sounds like you're just making smart decisions for a young person at the time.
Sure. Yeah, I would say there were educated guesses, at that time, because, in hindsight, maybe everything's, fairly smart. But I was such a fan of two different things. Like, I like to fail fast, whether it was in business or in personal life. Like for me, yes, you can get stuck in analysis and strategy in general is great, but sometimes there's no substitute for just jumping into a ring with boxing gloves. Like, I could do all the classes, and yes, I probably should, but it's like, if you really want to learn super fast, is there a way where heads I win, tails I break even? And so to me, that was this concept. I'm going to be living there. It might go well, but worst case, I just have a house that I'm paying the mortgage on that I'm living in, which, to me really limited the downside of what I was kind of getting into at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. And geographically, you had a good price point where you were compared to like living in San Diego and trying to get your first home, So did that help at all, knowing like, well, maybe you're not going to get the windfall of appreciation that somebody in San Diego does, but you're also not on the hook for $900,000 for a 2-bedroom.
That's very true. Like in North Dakota, the appreciation's about as steady and flat as the whole land, right? It's just like 3% per year forever.
But that's exactly what you were looking for. I mean, that's really right. Like fit your initial model, buy real estate and wait, the traditional thing that you should do.
Yeah. The motives I feel like are extremely clear. Like some people like to do it just because it's fun. Some people like it because of the cash flow. Some people like it because of the wealth. And for me, I was I was all in camp leverage and camp cash flow. I was like, how much leverage can I possibly pull on my time and on my capital, using other people's money, other people's time to protect my own and to maximize, the returns, trying to minimize the risk. And so for me, it was like, I was just searching that famous $10,000 a month in passive income. And that pulled me enough to be like, okay, I'm going to keep looking at, am I going to develop a product? Am I going to try day trading? Am I going to try real estate? Am I going to try, winning it on daily fantasy sports? And it just turned out that when I tested all of those, real estate just happened to come out, on top through my matrix.
Yeah. And talking about that steady 3% increase, when you live in a state like that, where it's going to be steady, not overwhelming either way, you're also limiting the risk because it's not going down 10% either. Like you're going to be very steady at that 3%, not huge jumps either way. And that kind of hedges your bets to like, oh, well, okay, I could just go up a little bit each month or each year, you change the rent a little bit and you're doing better.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've bought 100 single family homes. So I always equate I'm just a base hit at a time. And sometimes I get jealous. I'll admit, I see somebody in California, I bought my house 10 years ago and I sold it and made more money than what I did at 100, times at the plate. And I'm like, gosh, what am I doing over here? Right. I'm just buying one, just couple $100 a month cash flow at a time. But then at the same time, had I done nothing, I would have been in neither category A or B. So now, the portfolio's changed a little bit where I have some in, the Midwest and the Southeast where the rent to price ratio is favorable. And then of course I have some that's like, I'm cash flowing nothing, but if the Tampa market, goes crazy, great, I can participate that. But at the beginning, it's just okay, you're just so worried about losing money. It's just that's what stops the most people. Either don't have the capital, the risk, that's involved. And so for me, it was just get up there and try to get a single base hit. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just don't lose your skin. And typically with time, just like time heals all wounds, typically time favors those in real estate.
Yeah. And I think if your goal is a single, you're protecting yourself as well, because you're not going after those properties that are going to be a gigantic rehab because that's maybe, a triple or, you strike out 3 times in a row. So, I mean, you're just making smart decisions again for a young person. Had you read any books or found bigger pockets before this, or this is just something, you like you said, you're like, well, I mean, I could try to crush fantasy sports and just dominate FanDuel, but which one's going to work? How did you come to this without a ton of background in it?
There's a famous story or a famous book that calls it beginner's luck. So 2012, I bought my first one, and after 4 years, I was like, you mean I've been living rent free and my house is now worth this, and I paid down this debt? I was like, this thing's easy. So I went and bought 3 more properties, and I sucked at it so bad. I tried to buy a 1910 house and rehab it with 10 grand. I was like,
you did try to hit a triple. You're like, let me try to go down the line.
Yeah.
Right,
so there was the up followed by the down very swiftly, and so it wasn't until after all that then I was like, oh, let's start getting educated. Let's get educated with free content. Let's join some paid groups and let's start networking with growth-minded friends. But it came from that pain that I went through it. So yes, there was some smart decisions, but I still went through what everyone else, most likely goes through, which was I probably took on a little bit more risk. I found a business partner. We were able to double up capital and time. But the next 3 properties were by no means a single, because we're like, oh yeah, this is the only way we can get this thing to cash flow is if we buy a 1900s house. And it was that should be easy. I got 5% in reserves. I was like, oh no, that's not quite how it works. But by going through that experience, there's no other way than just that true hard knocks of learning it.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at what we've gone through with interest rates, I think that's a lot of what people are thinking. I have to get this to cash flow. So they're looking for forced appreciation, but they don't have the experience to do it. Is that what happened? You just bit off too much, more than you can chew. And it's we don't have the experience to turn this into the cash flow that we thought we could.
Yeah, it was a 1910s house. We bought it for $150,000. We're like, oh, it's 4 bedrooms, so it should rent for $1,500. Here's the 1% rule. Brandon Turner on Bigger Pockets told me that was a good number, so let's make an offer. And then I was like, okay. So then you go into it, and it's like, oh, it turns out a 1910s house with plaster and the furnace and the PVC piping and stuff doesn't work. And then we're trying to replace an egress window, and it's like, oh, this doesn't now meet code. You have to make the window twice as big, so you got to cut out into the siding. And you have this window in the bathroom that's not vented. And I was like, oh man. So then it was just tallying up. So now it's just damage control. Okay, now we're going to put in another probably 30 to 40 grand that we didn't expect. And it's well, that's a whole nother house purchase. That's 20% down on another home. So it's okay, So now we're cash flow positive, but our return on equity is terrible. We
Right.
thought we were going to get a 12% cash on cash. Turns out it was much less than that. It's probably like a 2% cash on cash. But it was like, now we know, check mark, that's what not to do.
Yeah.
Next one, like, okay, here we now have our list of what we're not going to do. So now we have our new non-negotiables. Screw up again, screw up again. If you do that enough time, your non-negotiables come, pretty standard. And now your buy box is like, nope, been there, done that, versus the hypothetical or the theoretical. And so I very much like to I try not to make, expensive mistakes, but I've made plenty of them. And now I know, but that's the only way, because I can hear it through someone else's experience and it guides my decisions. But a lot of times, like, okay, to me, it was just a calculated reward to risk. It could have gone great. But if it's a 2-to-1, if it's a 7-to-1, whatever ratio I'm putting it in my bind, it's like everything's a risk. I love the Jim Rohn quote. He's like, yeah, life is so risky. Here's how risky it is. You ain't getting out alive.
Yeah, right. And you never know when that's going to happen either. But how did you even start choosing the houses though? Was it just price point specific when you kind of didn't know what you're doing? Like, hey, these three are in our price range. Let's just get one of them. And how were you even coming up with the rents at the time to hopefully hit that 1% rule?
Yeah, it was just search as frantically as I could for the lowest price homes with the highest number of the highest number of bedrooms, and then see if I could add a bedroom so that I could get the rent. And generally it was the 1% rule, where it's like, hey, if I could get that, numbers kind of worked out. So it was searching the MLS. It was, how much repairs does it need? What do we do that? But then it was like, man, I'm just like, it's tough to find those, or we ran out of capital. Like, we bought 3 properties. So then I found the business partner, and they were like, how do we get more cash flow, or how do we find a deal? So then that's when we told college kids to go pick a house. And if they rented out the 1% rule, I'll buy the house for them. And so that was like the next little leverage that we're like, oh, cool. Like, there's not a bunch of rentals for college kids. So if they buy a $200,000 house and they rent it for $2,000 a month, I was like, I don't know, the numbers work for me. So that was the way to buy new properties, to actually get the 1% rule, which is a little bit of a different value add. Now, after they left, after 1 or 2 years, market rent might have been $1,600, but at least I curbed, that initial purchase and getting through it. And then that's eventually where we pivoted to like, well, what if the rent just stayed that way, or they bought the home back from us? And then that's how we pivoted into the lease with an option to buy, where the tenant picks the house, we buy the home, and then they live in it, and then they have the first right of refusal to purchase the home back.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely necessary. Growing up, I remember there was a lot more lease to own. And I know there's people who do it specifically like you guys do now, but it's not a thing. Like sometimes renters will ask, hey, can I lease to own? And we're like, what are you talking about? People just don't do that. Have you found that you're unique in this area? Because I guess it's just a little difficult for people, but I don't think it's as difficult as they think.
Yeah, the reason that I think that people have so much hesitation around it is because it's not standardized.
Right. Yeah.
You go to a mortgage and you got a 20-page loan officer mortgage document, all that. You get a lease. It's like, although they can vary a little bit by city or state, you can do that. You get into the creative financing space, seller financing, land contract, rent to own, lease option. You look at state statutes, and very few of them are like, yeah, this is exactly what you can or can't have. Besides like some usury laws on interest rates, there's only like 3 states with actually option to purchase requirements for it. And so like you get into this gray area, and because it's not standard, everyone's like freaks out. Like if I saw a mortgage for the first time and no one had told me about it, I'd be like, what's this? What's this? What does that mean? But everyone just signs on the dotted lines because the government has sponsored it, or there's some sort of consumer protection laws, versus a lease with an option to buy. I could get a $200,000 house and get a $40,000 option fee from someone who has no equity in the home. And so there's risk in doing that. And so that's where I think it's gotten a bad rap as well, because there's some investors are like, I want the highest down payment. I just want to turn over the property because it's a lucrative number, but they're just being terrible to people. And so our whole goal is educate the tenant side, like, hey, this can actually be a win-win if it makes sense. Hey, here's your agreed upon purchase price. Here's how much of your rent goes back to you as a credit. Here's your fixed. Here's who's doing repairs. Here's who's doing maintenance. Here's how home insurance is working. And if both sides can agree on it, they get an inspection on the home. They get an appraisal on the home. Okay, now it feels a lot more legit. And that's our whole mission and goal is like, okay, how do we make this transparent, fair, and equitable to both sides? So it's actually a win-win. Even if a tenant stops paying, that's their own consequence. But if an investor fails on their end, in certain things, what recourses does the tenant have? And to our knowledge, there's not a ton of people just owning that space. There's some companies that'll buy homes like Whole Partners of America and Divvy Homes, although they're not, doing that too much right now. But that's a very similar concept where they're just these large companies like BlackRock will buy the home, rent it out, and then not often give people the option to buy because they want the upside. But I'm okay if I bought rental properties all day, every day, and I just got 3 to 4%, and I knew that was happening. I was like, that's good enough for me. But if in 2021 it went up by 12%, and the tenant decides that they get 8% equity, from them taking the risk of doing an option to buy, like, cool. Like that's still a great win-win. Like I got my cash flow, I got my purchase, I sold it back to them. They have equity in the home. And so to me, it was, don't need to be, greedier than that because investors are already trying to protect their downside. So if it's just, you can't make more than 4%, but you can't, you could make less, but it's just capped. And so then that's kind of the give and take of our model of matching the two.
Yeah, I mean, your model's like an alternative scale model. People more think like, oh, more money. Yours is more opportunities, same amount of, basically spread or percentage on each, generally, depending on what the, appreciation is. But if you just think of it from a general sense, from a tenant's point of view, which most landlords don't really consider all that much. Well, some, no, maybe 50-50 in that area. Who's going to take better care of a home? A person who knows they can never buy it, have no ownership, and they can leave when they want. They could just run away. Or someone who has a built-in, possibility to buy the home. That means they're going to take care of it better, which means your upkeep and maintenance should be much better just compared to a standard renter.
And that was the thing that really, because you always play with a spreadsheet. Okay, what's our vacancy? What's our maintenance? What's our CapEx? And what's our property management?
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, you add up those, and it's somewhere between 15 and 40%, depending on whatever numbers that you put into there. I was like, man, that's a large spread. If that can get down to 5 to 15% because someone else is taking it on, well, you just automatically got like a 20% bump in different pieces. And because we ran out of capital as investors, I was a civil engineer, partnered up with someone in construction. We're like, okay, 20% down, 20% down. I was like, man, we could only buy like 2 homes because it's like when you're buying, $200,000 homes, that's 40 grand, a pop. So like, how can we do this for less? So that's what we started using seller credit tricks where we would buy it for 210, get 10K back. And then, have the tenant bring in 10 to 20 grand. And then so they're like, okay, well now we're only, coming in with 20 grand of property. So we can buy, twice as many. And since we had high credit, banks wanted to give, doctors, lawyers, attorneys, they're just begging you with the 800 credit score and that W-2 platinum card. They're like, yeah, please, please borrow some money.
Yeah, I mean, I think these buyers are getting an opportunity because I think renters in general feel hamstrung. Like, oh, you can't paint the walls. No, you can't put up that shelf. Don't put up these, or you're gonna have to paint it back. So to be able to just give a little bit of an option, not only do you feel more like you're owning something, but you have just a little bit more freedom in there. Because if you have a bad landlord, like you like. The phone rings late one night and you get a complaint and you're like, are you serious? Like I was just watching, it was a game. Like we cheered at 11:30 because games start so late. So we cheered when the Giants scored and now, our neighbor's complaining or something. It's, it can get a little silly. So it's interesting for renters. Hey, it's Jonathan. I hope you're enjoying this episode with Adam Zock. I found it really interesting. And what I want to ask you is this something that makes sense to you? Because a lot of times we hear in the outside world, people say you can't be a real estate investor and also do good for others. This is an opportunity, and it's a win-win situation. The investor is going to be able to win on one end. That tenant who wants to own is going to be able to win by getting in and paying in originally until they can get themselves ready for that traditional mortgage. And then it all works out. So I hope you listen from beginning to end to hear the rest of the story with Adam Zock from Home Equity Partner. Let's get back to the show. Did you fall into the creation of Home Equity Partner just based on what you guys were doing? That's what it sounds like. Yeah. That's
right. So when we had the college kids picking out homes close to the campus, that was just leasing. And then someone asked us, hey, can we buy this? And I was like, sure, we can just do a purchase and sale agreement. But then somebody asked me what rent to own is. And then I YouTubed it. And Chris Crone, he's like, he's kind of the flashy TikTok, YouTube. And he's like, do you want to make the best money where you get cash now, cash flow, and cash later? And I was like hooked. So then it was doing that. And then I took a bunch of courses on lease with an option to buy, like Joe McCall's course on sandwich lease options. So then I like self-educated myself. I was like, okay, there's a bunch of different ways to do lease options, do rent to own. So it's like, okay, here's how people are doing it. I can just have it. It's either existing inventory that people are selling, or there's the rare breed was, hey, I'm going to go find someone, hand pick them and say, hey, go shopping with a real estate agent, pick a house and I'll buy it for you. And so that was the clever twist that we had on it that we didn't think anybody was doing. And of course, large companies were doing it all over the place. But there's only maybe a handful of people that are like, I'm people first, property second, not property first, people second. And so that's where right now I think we've screened, maybe 500 applicants. We're closing on about a home a week for people, within Home Equity Partner and the funds that we've created and joined. And so that's where it's really started to hit some scale. And of course, we're still a smaller company. We're not getting bought out by BlackRock for $6 billion like Home Partners of America did. But like that, there's a reason they did that. That business model works. They got, whatever it is, 30,000 homes by saying, hey, tenants, go pick a home. You'll rent it and you have the right to purchase. If you buy the home, great. If you don't buy the home, we're fine too. Our model is a lot more, we want you to buy the home at the end because we don't really want the inventory. We just want to be that 1 to 3 year bridge that gets them into traditional financing, or they can buy it off all cash.
Yeah. And I mean, that kind of streamlines the mission, right? I mean, you're trying to do it this way. I mean, I think of it like people who say, oh, it's no big deal, just foreclose. Like nobody wants to foreclose. Nobody wants to foreclose. That's not the point of being a hard money lender. You don't want to foreclose. You just want to get the steady returns. Same type of idea. Like, let's keep you in the home, do a good job. Let's make sure, that you can reach the markers that you want to buy it. So before we get to the investor's point of view, let's just go through how it works for a renter who wants to become a buyer. Do you find them? They find you? And then how do you go about the purchase? And then just explain a little bit more about how that lease option works, kind of functionally.
Sure. So if you're looking to get into a home, that would be the caveat, because I actually think that some people are better off renting. And I think there's some people that are better off just waiting and securing a mortgage in 1 to 3 years. Like just get your financial house in order, clean up debt, get your 2 years of personal taxes, do all that stuff. Like sometimes a company like ours, you don't even need. However, there's that slim people that is our niche where you're like, if you make good money, you have a down payment, but for some reason your debt to income, you don't have the 2 years taxes, whatever it is, like you're making over 100 grand and you got, 50 grand to put down. You're just like, who wouldn't give me a home? And Adam's like, you're going to put down 50 grand on a home. You're going to pay this amount in rent. Like, why would a bank say no? But the bank has their box. And so like for me, just being I'm just going to call it a normal human being and an individual for an investor. I'm just like, the loan to value is the biggest risk. And so the tenant would then find us, we would give them and we would screen them just like a mortgage company would or a landlord company would. So we're going to verify, even though we don't have a minimum credit score, it's like, okay, we need to prove your income. We want, your picture because we're literally buying you a house. So it might feel like a mortgage. And essentially we give them a pre-approval letter. That's like a rent-to-own pre-approval letter, similar to like a bank would give it. Then they show that to their agent, and then they go house hunting. And it's actually our company that puts in the offer with the real estate agent, all based on their approval. So they say, here's the house. We give them terms. They say, yep, make the offer. We say, great. Here's everything. Here's the inspection is going to be in 10 days. It's contingent upon an appraisal. Here's literally our offer. Do you approve with this? And they say, yep. And that's how we get a lot of real estate agents referring us clients too, is because they'll get people that can't get traditional financing, but then we'll actually come in, swoop in, close the deal, assign the appraisal over to us, and we can, sometimes do all cash deals. A lot of times we use our own underlying debt financing. So it's just really those tricky people that are like, I have to move to this new city. I don't want to move multiple times. Yeah. I have an existing home that I'm renting in and he's trying to sell it. Can I buy it from him and, give myself a little bit more time? And so that's the idea is they just apply, they get pre-approved, they get the house under contract, then they move into the home, but then there's still that 3-year period that we're working with them that there's no prepayment penalty, but they just sometime in the next 3 years get traditional financing lined up.
Yeah, I would guess that you probably got a couple calls from real estate agents in the beginning being like, is this a scam? Like, why are you buying this house for this stranger? Did that happen?
They're very much so. And it's like, hey, like, I actually don't want you to pay me. I want to pay you. which usually deflates their guards, right?
Right.
If I'm like, yeah, sure, just sign up for our program and you can be a premier agent with Zillow and you can pay whatever. But I'm like, no, how about I'm just your buyer's rep and you get your standard 3% commission? And they're like, oh, well, that sounds good. Like, you got a pre-approval letter? Yep. You want to make an offer? Yep. All right, here's a purchase and sale agreement.
You're fully backed by a bunch of other transactions that you've done, that you can show them. That probably helped too. But I can see if I got one of those a couple of years ago, I would have been like, come on, man. Like, are you serious? Like, this is real, but it is real.
Yeah. And that's where over the last 7 years, as we build it up, and now we got the Google reviews, we got agent testimonials, we have tenant testimonials, we got investor testimonials. Like, that sometimes is just so much easier once you have the social proof and you're like, oh, somebody literally 5 days ago gave us a 5-star review. It was like, hey, I actually got the home when the bank said no. Thank you, home equity partner. It's like, like that's not mine. Like, that's the pretty easy social proof then.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how do investors get involved? Because I think this is a really interesting crossover for the episode, because there's a big opportunity for investors to not only do good and help, but also make a pretty solid return.
What I did, or what I might suggest, is if you have existing properties or you're living in a single family home that you're thinking about moving to, I called it the make me move price. So I've done this twice. I just listed my home as a lease with an option to buy. I said, hey, if someone's got at least $10,000 down and they're willing to pay this amount in rent, post it on Zillow and Facebook Marketplace. And someone was like, hey, I'm looking for a rent to own. And then I would only show the house because my wife would only give permission to show people, because she's like, don't just have a bunch of people running through it. But it was like, set the standard high enough. So if you have existing property, it could be the home that you live in, could just be other rentals. Advertising it that way and just filling your own properties, you wouldn't need us, but that's just one strategy that I personally used. That was just like, oh, that was me dipping my toe into kind of rent with an option to buy. Then it was like, okay, if I either don't have property or I'm all stabilized, now it's send 2 emails, find your favorite agent and find your favorite loan officer and just say, hey, do you have anyone that couldn't get pre-approved this week? To which the answer is pick one, because I have so many of them. And it says, hey, I'm looking for someone, I have X amount of capital. I can get a loan right now at a 7% interest rate on a typical $200,000 house. My mortgage payment might be $1,400, depending on what taxes, insurance, and whatever state that you live in. If someone's willing to give me, $1,800 a month in rent and cover, repairs and maintenance, I'll actually buy them that home. So as long as they make over $6,000 a month, so that they're less than a 30% debt to income ratio, you have anybody like that? That's, that has, maybe the 3.5% to put down, like a typical FHA, I'll close that deal for you, real estate agent, and I'll still get you your transaction. Or loan officer, let's put them in that house. And then in 6 months to 3 years, you are their refinance tool. Or in this case, it's a new purchase. If you do a land contract, then it's a refinance. But the way we structure it, it's a brand new purchase. So they can use whatever first-time home buyer credits. They can use their option fee and all that stuff. So that's kind of the pitch. And then Adam will say, hey, if anybody sends us a lead, I'll give you $1,000. So then that usually incentivizes it a little bit too, that if some investor, some hair salon, some construction company was like, hey, I got this person, Adam, and we have a little form and a referral form that we can send to people. But if we're buying a home from someone, for someone, that's how we, make money as well, by buying homes, because that's our whole mission, is to be able to do that. So then that's kind of our referral network of being able to reach out to agents, to loan officers and other people to help them additionally refer people over to Home Equity Partner.
Yeah. And then so investors on the back end, just to tell everybody what they're investing in. Are they investing in the real estate, or they're investing in the company that's investing in the real estate?
Oh, sure. It makes sense. Yeah. So people can do it themselves. If someone wanted to reach out like, hey, Adam, like, what do you have going on? I would say, hey, have a conversation with us, what we could do, because we can either pair them with an individual house. We're like, hey, we had 10 people apply this week. Does one of these work? And then we would literally just match you to. And then in the future, if we've built enough relationship, that's when they can start investing in our funds.
Right.
And so, where we've had a couple different funds, and that's where it's like, hey, you pool 20 people's capital, and then now we're buying, 5, 10, 15, 20 million worth of assets. If you're, either meet certain criteria, whether or not you have to know someone on the general partnership, or you have a certain relationship. So that's the other way that people have gotten to know us.
Yeah. And then on the funds, is that just a standard straight return?
No, so we're not doing debt financing. What we did is we created the 506B, or did the typical almost fund, or people what they would normally see on the multifamily, like a syndication approach. And so on the past, ones that we've done, it's like the same, like a preferred return with a split.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, it's touching a lot of different areas of real estate. So you must have people who are very interested and also confused. So I'm trying to help them piece together like where they can get in there. But it really solving a lot of different problems out there. And as you said, helping people along the way who may not be able to just buy that house right now, even though probably they should be able to. Anyone who's dealt with traditional mortgage lenders is like, I don't understand how I don't qualify.
That is really tricky. And I think, for real estate investors, the question has to be very personal. It's like, I want to be hands-on, and I'm trying to juice my return by the amount of effort that I put into it. Or I have, doctors that are like, hey, Adam, if I just gave you $100,000, can you put that money to work? And I'm like, absolutely. Yeah. And so, I think you have to figure out if you're an active investor, if you're a passive investor, like, do you make a bunch of money? You don't have a bunch of time. You just want X amount of passive income. Or you're like, you know what? I kind of want to be in the middle where like, I just want to like get the deal, but then I want to hand it off to a property manager or to someone. And so kind of knowing each investor's individual goals and what's a good fit, because there are syndications out there. There's, you can, buy a house off the MLS. So this would just be one way that we've found that we can, hit double or beyond double digit returns, is just this specific investment vehicle model.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to the like potential for matching investors with the potential home buyer, have you guys ever kind of matched family who wanna kind of gift a house to a child, but are like, hey, I don't know, let's tie this up with a little bit more security than just doing it?
Sure. So not specifically on the family to family, because if it was me, I would probably go a different route than a lease with an option to buy, whether it's a land contract, if it was just a standard rental agreement. But I guess I have seen that where there's like, hey, you can rent this. Here's your rent. And if you want to buy the house, here's how much you can buy it for. But I imagine either, because like most people are like, oh, just co-sign on the loan if they're trying to help someone out. That's kind of the first option if they can't get a bank loan.
But somebody may be like, I mean, I'm not really sure my kid's going to make the payment. So let's maybe not do the co-signer thing.
Yeah, and then they get to stay on title. So then, if they're doing it a rent, because as soon as you go to seller finance or a land contract, I mean, that gets recorded at the county. Then if something goes wrong, it's typically you got to go to the court to get that removed.
Yeah. So, I mean, just in terms of finding the people, how are you finding them now? Or have you guys just built up enough of a reputation where you're just going to have a bunch of incoming leads to vet to see if they match your program? And if not now, how did you start finding people that would match the program?
Yeah, we started off all word of mouth. Adam just talking with agents, loan officers, my own network, and it was 100% referral for the first 20. And I was like, how do other businesses do this? Because I didn't get into this business to like, even though I enjoyed it, I was like, this isn't sustainable. Like I can't just duplicate Adam or triple Adam. I was like, there's got to be a different model.
Hours a week. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then that's when we discovered digital advertising. And so there's 50,000 people a month searching rent to own homes in Google. And so like, it's an incredibly high number. It's like, not as high as someone searching Taylor Swift, but there's enough like of a demand.
No numbers
there.
That high. I mean, especially after last night's game. So it's just, it's not a thing. But I would suppose that in this particular niche, there is a lot of kind of spam out there. So it must be hard to convince people that you're real. I mean, obviously you're good with the dialogue and explaining it, but if I just typed in rent to own, I think there'd be a lot of shifty stuff out there.
There certainly would. And so like, we have a whole podcast dedicated to it. We just did a full year, which was like how to avoid scams, how to, how to make things legit. Like if someone's trying to like collect $1,000, application fee or option fee, or how to verify that they're actually on title. Are they actually the owner? How to get some, different Google reviews. Because if it's a ma and pa and you kind of know them, like that's probably the best reward versus risk. Like if you can negotiate terms, like do they actually live in there? Because the tough part is like you move into a home, no one wants to be like, oh, by the way, I'm selling this house. Like, what? Right. Or like, hey, you have to move out, or, X, Y, or Z. You get the foreclosure notice on the door because the owner wasn't paying the underlying mortgage. And so for us, it just started off that way. And then once we got enough Google reviews and social proof, then it kind of goes away where it's a little bit easier. But yeah, some of the other companies, like you said, like look at their Better Business Bureau reviews, look at their Google reviews. If they don't have any, do they have any social preference? Can you even talk to a human being? And so for us, we actually get more selective because
right.
we're actually trying to only pick people who are making over $100,000 a year. We've just found that it's easier to buy a house for people in that range.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in terms of your own personal investing, have you stuck with single family houses? Has that always been your thing?
I would say 90% of my portfolio is that. I've done some, limited partner, investing on multifamilies myself just to kind of get, familiar with that. I'm a general partner on several different funds. And then, my own personal portfolio is like still stuff some money into, 401k and all that fun stuff, even though I do less of it now because I'm just so much into the real estate and then the business of real estate because there's equity there. But I would say 90+% of mine is the single family, which always scared me a little bit. But then I was put to some relief through Dave Ramsey when he was like, turns out if you know single family, like maybe that makes sense that most of your portfolio is in something that you happen to know more than 99% of the population in.
Right. I mean, a lot of my best investments have been houses that I lived in. And I think that people are looking to be real estate investors and they almost discount, as you were saying in the beginning, like that first purchase is really, really good. You can make a crap ton of money on the first house that you buy. Hey, guess what? You can also enjoy it and live there. And then you can move, keep it, and 10 years later, it's doubled in value. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is really how real estate works. But I feel like with all the flashy stuff out there, people almost discount the enjoyment factor, which I think is a little bit weird because it's cool to buy a house, but you can also like it as well.
That's right. And because wholesaling, is always the sexy thing, right? Like I don't need any money and I can just connect to A to B and it'll be super easy and I can get a 10 grand check. And so that sounds good to me too.
Yeah. If it were possible and if it really happened, on a good percentage of the time, everybody really would be doing it. But that I feel like it's just, people think of single family home buying, especially there's just a lot of people I'll see. They're like, should I buy an investment property or should I buy a house for myself and my family? It's like, I think your family wants the house, I think you're not considering everybody else. But when you buy the house and you make a good investment, 2 years later, you're going to have equity. And I think that's part of this is, like you say, you're trying to educate them on how it all works. So it makes more sense when they can finally close. But I feel like people are missing the education part because they're looking at the flash big bucks in one month, instead.
Yeah, I don't remember the study or the stat, off the top of my head, but my venture to guess is that 80% of people's wealth comes through their home within their first maybe 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard to grow that much wealth in a business or other investments or a 401k or different things, outside of that, it's certainly doable, but the majority of people it just happens to be that because you have the debt payment, it's paying down, and typically, real estate appreciates. So it's just kind of the natural consequences. Like you said, ooh, cool, I get to paint the walls. You mean I can actually sleep in a bed and, play in the backyard? Like, ooh, how cool is this that my investment is something I'm enjoying?
Yeah, and double points for people who are handy and can do cosmetic little stuff on their own and make it look that much better. I learned that my first flip, my dad was a flipper, but my first flip, all I did was paint and change the carpet and get new appliances. And I made $25,000. I lived there for like a year and a half, but I turned around. I was like, that's it. Like I'm not like DIY. I can't fix anything. Like I just had somebody paint it. I actually did paint a little on that one, but hired a carpet company. They changed the carpet. This is just what you can do. It's just trying to figure out the best way and maybe watch less TikTok and start to focus on the people. Podcasts are a great way, though, to figure out who knows what, I think, because we were talking about, what's a little bit more flashy online. You don't really see them on podcasts because I don't think that those people can sustain an hour. They're just going to go back or keep pushing the product instead of having a real discussion about real estate.
Yeah. It depends if they're trying to inspire and motivate, or if they're trying to go for, the amount of views, or if they're actually trying to help someone get, their next investment platform or get their next, real estate purchase. Yeah.
So for Home Equity Partner, you guys are just in the Midwest right now?
Yeah. So there's very few states that we would not consider. We just happen to be targeting the Midwest to Southeast because the rent to price ratio, makes the most sense. But we're in, I think, 30 plus states. And if anyone in literally any state reached out, we would consider it, because we just have a real estate attorney review it for the local city laws. So like California would make me lean back a little bit, but besides
Fair.
that, like there's almost no other state that, we wouldn't consider, because we just have a real estate attorney draft up the documents.
Yeah. So, I mean, just quickly, before we get to some wrap up, describe who your ideal person is on the way coming in, that buyer, and then also the investor, because I think that might help kind of clarify, who should be taking a look and who's like the avatar that's the best fit, because it's not for everybody.
Sure. I would say, like, let's say that the person wanting a home is a rock star real estate agent, like just started 2 years ago and happened to have listed and sold, $50 million in property. And so he's got $200,000 in income, paying 50 grand in taxes. He's like, oh man, I'm crushing it. Like I would love to, buy a house, but they're renting it, but they need their 2024 tax return, because like otherwise the bank just absolutely will not touch them. You need 2 years of tax returns. It has to be growing and they have to average it. So they're like, turns out I could probably afford a $400,000 house if their income pace goes on. So then I get an investor, let's just say he's a civil engineer working, an 8 to 5 job. It's like, hey, what if I just bought you that home? So I'm gonna buy that $400,000 home. I'm gonna put in 20%, so 80 grand. Out of that 80 grand, how about we split it? You put in 40, I put in 40. You pay me my mortgage plus $500. And at the end of 1 year, you can buy back the house for me for $420,000. Let's just add a 5% number on there to help cover some closing costs and some appreciation. To which that might be a really great fit. The person gets to get a $400,000 house. Within a year, they have a certain price they can buy it back for, and the real estate investor might make a 15 to 17% annualized return on that specific deal. And yeah, it's not maybe a long-term like buy and hold, but from a typical investor trying to do something like that, from a risk to reward, you're only into it for 10%, so you're 40 grand. So your return on investment is quite a bit higher. So I would say those are the two people that we would likely match together. And of course, we offer services that are either for one individually, like if the investor can't find the tenant, if the tenant can't find the investor, that's where then we're playing matchmaker. We'll either play investor, we'll play, both sides.
Yeah. And so say the tenant goes in with best intentions, but then loses the job, so they can't buy the house. Are they able to keep renting, or is there just some type of modification of the agreement there?
So what we like to do is give them 3 years to, buy back the home. It's just basically like, hey, if you need a year, double it. If you need 2 years, like give them 3 years. So it's like, if they want to buy it anytime beforehand, like there's no penalty. The issue would come is if they get to the end of the lease or they stop paying rent. Like obviously
right.
With your mortgage or rental, like you would lose your down payment, you would lose those different things. So that would be the downside or the risk that you're playing as the tenant. If you feel like your income is going to go away, or you would risk, losing that money or losing that home should your income change.
Yeah.
And you can't get a co-applicant or something.
They have to basically be able to get themselves an outside mortgage within 3 years to make sure that they can push a deposit into that.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Hopefully everyone was riding with me, just making sure we have this correct to get that there. But awesome. So just based on your experience, though, over your time as an investor and now working, and founding Home Equity Partner, if there's a new investor out there who has some money and wants to get into investing, based on your experience, where would you tell them to start now?
I would likely tell them to invest in their backyard. It's going to feel the most comfortable. You probably have the most unique, fair advantage of knowing schools, where things are growing, contractors, connections. And so if you've already exhausted that, or you're looking to do some, long distance, type investing, then I think you could have another consideration. But if I'm just picking one thing, man, it's just invest in your backyard where you feel comfortable. You can go see it. You can touch it. You can fix some things. Now, if you're looking to scale beyond that, I'd be like, don't touch it. Don't look at it. Like for me, like I haven't seen any of the last 70 properties that we've bought. And so like that, but that's a very different mentality than someone's like, if I'm looking at my next one, like there's probably, and someone is getting an accepted offer on a home in your town in this next week. And it's just like, why couldn't that be you? Because it clearly works for them in some fashion.
Yeah, I think proximity is really important when you start, just like you said, so you can manage, so you can learn. Even when people buy rental properties and they say, oh, I'm just going to get property management. I'm like, why? you can't manage a rental that's in pretty good shape. Like, this is how you learn that you hate it. But don't do it on the first one. It costs way too much. You need like 5 to make it even make sense.
That was the same thing for a mentor told me that too. He's like property manager first one. That way, like how hard is it to find a new tenant? What does the turnover actually cost, and what does it look like? Yeah. And all of those fun things of the text and emails and different things. But now having a family with 3 young kids, like different design than when I first started, when it was just me and the wife, and we could pull up carpet on a Sunday night if we needed to instead of watching football. Now it's like, protect the time, get the systems, get the processes in place.
Yeah. And you also know how to manage the management now, which is the most important part. If you never do it, you won't even, they can slip everything by you. It's like the bartender who works, at a bar where the manager's never run a bar before. Not too hard to skim the till there. And that's what will happen in real estate if you're not careful.
You are correct.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you spending the time. It was good to get a lot of that information out there about Home Equity Partner. Is the best place, obviously, to find you guys at homeequitypartner.com?
You got it. Do that. You can reach out to me personally on LinkedIn or send me an email, adam@homeequitypartner.com.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. It's so funny because now I can see on the bottom, because of the way that on Riverside they have it, I couldn't see it because it's matching your shirt, but it says Zach in there because Adam's last name is spelled Z-A-C-H, but I checked before that it was Zach, and it's not, so I corrected myself. But yeah,
I tried to name our second born Johann Sebastian just so that no one would confuse his last name. My wife didn't quite buy on that one. I was like, who would say Johann Sebastian Zach? Like, no one's gonna do it. So then we'll just have like a shoe in for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to side with her on that one. Yeah. All right, man. I really appreciate the time. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah. All right. That was Adam Zach of homeequitypartner.com. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for sticking around. I know you know this, and I've been saying it a lot, but now I'm giving episode previews at the end. So if you stick around all the way to the end, you know what episode is coming up next, and you get a quick little preview so that when it hits your inbox on Monday or Thursday morning, you can get to it. First thing, next episode, my guest is Jake Clopton of Clopton Capital. Now, he got into the debt business, meaning capital, without any experience. And now it's expanded into multiple different parts of real estate and investing options. Now that means he has a lot of different options for investors, but he's also an investor himself. And that's why I really like the stories of all of these guests. Everybody starts somewhere, they start investing on their own, they figure out what they're going to do, and then they bring their business into that and figure out how they can grow their own business. So this is a lot about capital markets, a lot about debt, but you're going to learn a lot as a real estate investor. We'll see you next episode with Jake Clopton.